So when we prescribe exercise, we use what's called the FIT formula. And F stands for frequency, how often we exercise. I stands for intensity, how intensely we exercise. Time stands for the duration that we exercise. And then type is the mode of exercise. And here's just a chart that shows some general recommendations for how intensely people are to applying that FIT formula for cardiorespiratory endurance, strength, or flexibility training. And for aerobic training, we say 3 to 5 days per week. And the reason generally recommend not going over 5 days a week is because people who exercise 6, 7 days a week have an increased dropout rate and also a greater risk of injury. So there is a small increase in their fitness level, in their VO2 max, exercising 6, 7 days a week. But many people feel it's such a small amount, it does not provide added incentive or value because of the increased dropout rate. Exercise intensity we can measure in a variety of ways or prescribe in a variety of ways. We can take a percentage of the maximum heart rate. We can say for someone who's just beginning to exercise at 65 to 75% of their maximum heart rate, whereas an individual who's exercising intensely, more physically fit, we can say 70 to 90%. The heart rate reserve or the Carbonin formula is just a little more specific. Instead of using just a general percentage, it is a little more individualized because we use the resting heart rate. VO2 reserve, we can use percentages of what their VO2 max was. So obviously we would have to measure a person's VO2 consumption to do this type of exercise prescription. And METs are just a multiple of the amount of oxygen that we consume at rest. So if someone's exercising at a 5 MET capacity, it just means they're using 5 times the amount of oxygen that's required at rest. And the value of the term METs is it allows us to talk about exercise for many different modalities. We can talk about the METs required going at a certain speed and grade on the treadmill, or a certain speed on your bike, or in the pool, or chopping wood. So we can talk about all these different ways of exerting, but in the same terms, which are METs. Kilocalories. This allows us to talk about calories that a person should expend over the week, and it can be it allows us to manipulate the intensity and the duration. So if somebody is trying to burn 500 kilocalories, they can either do it more intensely for a shorter duration, or else they can do it less intensely for a greater duration. And then the last one is RPE, or rated perceived exertion. That's someone's subjective evaluation of how intensely they're exercising. So if we're going to prescribe exercise off of maximum heart rates, and maximum heart rate is the fastest our heart can beat. And the true way of measuring a maximum heart rate is to put someone on a treadmill and every 3 minutes or so increase their workload until we finally give them a workload increase and their heart rate does not increase. That's their maximum heart rate. And it's really very closely related to our age, genetics, and it's not greatly affected by our training level. So it's not feasible to put everybody on a stress test to come up with their maximum heart rate. So we'll often predict it, and we'll take the number 220 and subtract the age. So a 20-year-old, 220 minus 20, is going to have a predicted maximum heart rate of 200. Over the years, they found this is a general formula. There is a little more inaccuracy in that there's some people who fall where they have actually truly a higher max or a lower max than what's predicted. And so over the years, they've developed this formula which is a little more accurate. Still, it's not 100%, but you take the number 207 and you subtract from that the product of 0.7 times the individual's age. So in this case, it's going to be 207. For our 20-year-olds, 70% or 0.7 times 20 is going to be 14. So 207 minus 14 is a predicted maximum heart rate of 193. So you can see there is a slight discrepancy in the two different ways of predicting. So to come up with a target heart rate, or what heart rate should a person exercise at that they're putting enough demand on their cardiovascular system to make those chronic adaptations, those beneficial adaptations, versus not putting too much demand on their heart that they're overtraining. And so we will use we can do a straight percentage. So we can just take a maximum heart rate times the percentage. So say this person wanted to be 74% of their maximum heart rate. We would just do 200 times 0.74 and they would get 148. And truly we usually have a range. We usually give someone a range like 70 to 85% or something like that, that their heart rate has to fall within that range, and they determine where they fall in that range by how it feels. But there again, we have another more sensitive way to come up with a target heart rate range, and that's called the Carbonin method, and we use the resting heart rate in this formula. So we'll take the maximum heart rate and we'll subtract from that the resting heart rate. Then that's what we multiply by the percentage, and then we add back on the resting heart rate. So in this case, where this person is, their predicted max was, in the previous slide, was 193, and we'll say their resting heart rate was 60, we come up with the number 133, and then we'll multiply that by times 0.7, and we come up with 93. And then we just add back on their resting heart rate, which makes their training heart rate 153. So we talked about METs, and METs are just, there again, a way to talk about all different types of exertion in the same terminology, or METs. And we can convert oxygen consumption to METs by dividing by 3.5. And the reason for that is that the amount of oxygen our body consumes at rest is 3.5 milliliters per kilogram per minute. So if we know the oxygen consumption, the oxygen required to do a certain task, we divide it by 3.5, we'll come up with the METs. And so we call it a metabolic unit. And 1 MET is 3.5 milliliters. So these are some of the activities. Probably what they did is they took a portable oxygen consumption and actually measured how much oxygen was consumed when they were doing different activities. And of course there's going to be some variability in it. So these are just ballparks. But dressing was about 2 METs. So that means the oxygen required to do the activity of dressing requires about 2 times the amount of oxygen that a person consumes at rest. And you can see it goes up from there. Cleaning windows is 3 METs, or 3 times the amount of energy or oxygen that's required at rest. Carpentry work, 5.5 METs, and then shoveling is 7 METs. So these are reflective of the increased demand for oxygen. And you can see how a person needs a higher level of fitness to do these different activities. Same thing with walking, cycling. It's been calculated with activities like handball and paddleball up around 10 METs. And so what a physician can do is, if there's a person who's been ill or had a cardiac problem, they can give them a treadmill stress test and see what level of METs they're functioning at and how their heart's doing at different MET levels. And then from that, they can indicate what activities they can return to, or an occupation. Many times they have the METs calculated for occupations. I've even seen it for carrying deer out of the woods. So somebody who has been ill, and they ask the doctor, they love to hunt, and they'll ask the doctor, can I go back to hunting? Well, the doctor can, from the stress test, tell whether or not this person has the physical ability to return to something like that. So here's the RPE, or rated perceived exertion, and that's just a subjective evaluation. So if somebody were minimally doing the easiest type of exertion at all, it would be like a 6 or a 7. Whereas people who are exerting and they're at their, nearly at their true max, it's a 19 or 20. And so we can tell people what RPEs to exercise at. And what you'll see is that people who are training for to increase their fitness level, they're in better fitness level, they'll exercise borgs of 14 to 16. So they're up closer to hard. Their workouts are hard. Whereas someone who's just generally trying to increase their physical activity, many times they exercise closer to borgs of 11 where it's light. And where this is important is it helps us determine where they should be in their target if we use the borgs with it. But also we find that people have increased compliance at lower borgs. So if you took, your average 40-year-old who hadn't been exercising throughout their life and you put them on an exercise program and they're always giving it borgs of 15 hard, chances are they're going to end up dropping out of the program. So if we allow people to exercise at lower borgs, then they tend to be more compliant and have a decreased risk of injury. It can work the other way too. If you have someone who's always been athletic and if you're holding them back and they're giving always rating their exercises light, and they'll become frustrated and they can drop out of a program if it's too light. And then calories, there again, usually we can tell people how many calories. Maybe their goal is to decrease weight, and so we can calculate the calories that they burn with different activities. And the talk test is just a general tool just to say people should be able to still carry on a conversation when they're at the lighter borgs, but when they're exercising at higher intensities, it'll become more difficult to carry on a conversation.